Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another one of our WESC webinars. Oh, sorry about that, guys. My name is Carly with WESC. As people are joining here, please go ahead and let me know if you can hear okay in the chat box. All right, awesome. It looks like everyone can hear okay. As always, this webinar will be recorded and available for on-demand viewing on our website. You'll also receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. Today, our topic is Don't Use That Tone of Voice with Me, and is presented by Nykea Behiel, Director of Marketing at Rock and Bloom. You'll notice there is a chat box as well as a Q&A box. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please try to use the Q&A box. I'll leave it up to Nykea to choose if she'd like to do the questions throughout or at the end. Nykea, we're so excited to have you. I'll hand it over to you now. Please start whenever you're ready.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Carly. Okay, I'm just going to get my screen ready and present here. So, oops. Give me one sec. All right, hopefully you can all see my screen. First off, thanks all of you for joining me on your lunch hour, and a huge thanks to WESC for inviting us to speak here. I have really great respect for what they do as an organization. We're so lucky to have this resource in Saskatoon. Like Carly said, today's webinar is called Don't Use That Tone of Voice with Me. So we've probably all heard those words before, likely from the mouths of teachers or parents, but companies have heard it too, except the language isn't as clear. It usually comes in the form of a bad review or an angry customer, or worse yet, total and complete silence. If your brand doesn't resonate, it dies. And there are a lot of reasons brands fail to resonate with customers. And one of the big ones is not having a strong brand voice. But this insight's often just flies over our heads because customers don't tell us that directly. Knowing when something is off kilter and defining a proper brand voice is trickier than that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because you've been so generous to spend your time with me, I feel like I should tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Nykea Behiel. I'm the Director of Marketing at Rock and Bloom. I'm an information junkie, so while I wish I had more of an inclination for music, anytime I have my headphones on, I've got a podcast or an audiobook or some sort of story. I went to Egypt and Morocco for my honeymoon while I was 6 months pregnant, which was an amazing trip. And I have the cutest baby in the world. This is my son, Hart, and he gets his unhealthy love of sweets from me. And probably a little bit more relevantly, who is Rock and Bloom? So between your brand or your business and your customers exists your brand, and that's where we come in. We're a brand agency that creates killer brands. Creating a brand is all about listening to our clients and their audience. So we identify opportunities and problems in a business, then create a roadmap to deliver insights to deliver a roadmap. Our office is in Riversdale, and we have lots of space to socially distance and a really great coffee machine. So if you're inclined to drop by, come by for a visit. Okay, I like to start with a quote. Today you are you that is truer than true. There's nobody else who is youer than you. That's by Dr. Seuss, and why it's relevant is because creating a brand voice is all about shaping an identity, making sure that you come through in the copy, the visuals, and the entire brand experience. You need to be you. What we're going to do today is go through brand voice, define it, why does it matter, go through some tips, examples, and failures, and then talk about how to define your brand's voice. And like Carly mentioned, if you've got questions throughout, feel free to put them in the Q&A panel. I don't know if I'll see them pop up, so if I happen to miss them, we'll definitely file back and go through them all at the end. First, what is brand voice? Simply put, brand voice is the way that you talk to your customers. It comes down to four main things: personality, the characteristics and the qualities that customers and employees use to identify you; tone, the feelings or moods conveyed. So while you have one brand voice, you'll have lots of brand tones. Think of yourself. You speak differently at the Christmas table versus when you're in a meeting with colleagues, at a party versus in the boardroom. Different situations call for different tones, and that's the same with a brand. Rhythm, that's the pace and the pattern of the words you use and the way that you speak, kind of the cadence of your voice. And lastly, vocabulary, the actual words you use. Each word is a choice and has a meaning. What makes a brilliant brand voice? First, it needs to be unique. You need to stand out and be memorable. Your voice needs to be different from your competitors and others on the market. Next, it needs to be authentic. The way you speak should feel natural, and it should be true to your company's why. We'll delve into that a little bit more in a bit, but it really needs to just sound like you, not robotic. It needs to be appropriate and speak to your audience in the way that they want to be spoken to, on the right platforms at the right times. And lastly, well, it seems obvious, it does pay to say it, it needs to be readable. Anyone should be able to read and understand what you're saying. We don't want copy so packed with corporate jargon or trying to incorporate slang that we're alienating potential customers. Readability and functionality is key. Why does it matter? Building a strong brand voice is all about being relatable and building trust. It's not about relating to everyone, but rather relating to your audience. You trust different people for different things. So would you ask your nephew or your grandpa for advice on video games? So think about who you relate to through your brand, what problems you solve for your customers, and when they would come to you. And you need to build trust, but again, not wholesale trust, building trust with your audience. All brands should be authentic. Their brand voice needs to show their why. Some brands that are known for this are Patagonia and Dove. A few years ago, oh, is that a question? No. Maybe Carly accidentally hit a button, but feel free to interrupt if there are questions, Carly. A few years ago, Patagonia ran this full page ad on Black Friday, and it said, "Don't buy this jacket." So while all other brands were pushing sales and trying to get consumers in the door early, Patagonia went with the exact opposite approach. The copy talks about the toll the construction and distribution of this jacket has on the environment, and it asks consumers to think about the environmental impact of consumerism, and maybe instead of spending Black Friday inside shopping, they should go outside. The result, they saw their revenues increase by about 30% that year. They know their audience, and they were building trust with their audience as people who care about the environment, people who want to be outside. So they were building trust with that particular audience by showing them that they share values with them. And similarly with Dove, when they began their campaign for Real Beauty years ago, and I think it's called something else now, like the Self-Esteem Project or something, but they transformed the way people looked at them and looked at beauty products in general. They became a brand that shared our values. So if you're a woman, you probably have the idea that the beauty industry is pretty contorted and it can be alienating. Dove's new mission statement was that beauty should be a source of confidence and not anxiety. So by aligning their marketing efforts with their mission statement, Dove's been able to change public perception to a brand that champions women's empowerment. They want to create conversations around this, around beauty and what real beauty is. And by showing it, so we can all speak this, but Dove put actual dollars behind their why. So they earn the trust of consumers because their marketing messages seem believable, and now we trust them. Providing a consistent customer experience also builds trust. Repetition builds trust. If you can deliver on a promise over and over and over again, then your customers will trust you. Your promise doesn't have to be perfection either. If you're a dental office and you promise me no wait times, then the first time I come, I wait 20 minutes. You've already broken your promise. I'm already not going to have as good of a brand experience as I could have otherwise. So we don't need to have the perfect experience. We just need to guide people through the experience that they are actually going to have. What we know is that purchasing is more of an emotional decision than a practical one. And people can't usually tell you exactly why they buy the things they buy or why they like the brands they like. Sure, if you ask us, we're going to give you a reason, but that's usually a justification rather than insight into how we were actually feeling at the point of purchase. When we purchase, we're feeling something within ourselves or some sort of connection to the brand. And so we want to speak to customers the way they want to be spoken to so that they have the opportunity to relate to our brand emotionally. And I hate to dwell on the things that we don't know, but we also don't know when a customer has their first impression. Your first interaction with them might be when they actually come into your office, but they may have had several other interactions before that. Many web pages, gone through your whole website, seen ads, seen you on social media, had a phone call, a referral from a friend, could be a million other points. And that's why every interaction should count, be positive, and be on brand. Our ideal is that we want every interaction to be brand recognizable. The way that you know this cup is from Starbucks, this arch is from McDonald's, this screen is from an iPhone, this thumb is Facebook's like button, and this curve is Nike's check mark. There's something in marketing that I call the shatterproof test. So if there was a piece of your product or a snippet of your service out of context, would people know that it was your brand? That's the goal in creating a strong brand voice. Every interaction should be distinctly you. Excuse me. Now we'll go into a couple tips and examples. First, we said this a couple times, but speak the language of your customers. The way they talk, talk the way they talk. That means keeping it simple. Use language that lets people be a part of your story, like you instead of the customer. So if you're using website language, say you. Don't say our customers think, you believe. Never use a long word when a short one will do. I think that might be Hemingway, or it's a quote out of context, but there's almost never a good reason to say utilizes. Just say uses. Don't make things more complicated than they need to be. Be concise. If you can say it in a sentence, don't take 3 paragraphs to get to the point. One of my biggest pet peeves is when I'm looking at a recipe online and I get the history of every ingredient before I get to the actual recipe. That's putting SEO ahead of the customer, and we never want to do that. Clarity over ambiguity. Make your calls to action, your CTAs clear. Tell your customer what you expect them to do. So if they click on a button, they should never have to make a leap of faith. Tell them exactly what they'll get. If they're gonna learn more or make a reservation, contact you, request a quote, whatever it is. Don't use corporate jargon. The last thing we want to do is confuse our audience or make them feel outside the brand. We want to bring them in. And always be optimistic. Hope is a way greater motivator than fear. There are a lot of words to say hello, a lot of ways to say it. So think of how your brand might say hello. Would you guys say good morning, bonjour, yo, hello? Lots of options. Just like there are lots of ways to say good. Your cousin might say sweet, your grandma might say the cat's pajamas, Dove might say wonderful, well, Axe might say awesome, even though they're selling pretty much the same product. Just one has a lot stronger scent. How does your brand say good? So clarify the vernacular you feel comfortable using and that your audience will understand, and make sure that comes through in your brand voice. Someone with a really defined brand voice is Starbucks. Their voice is functional, which means clear, helpful, and simple. So they want to make customers' experience easier and more enjoyable. The other tenet of their voice is expressive. I like their description of day-making thoughts. So to present a product truth in a fresh and interesting way, always noting where the audience is interacting. Here are a couple of examples of Starbucks. This is some of their marketing in store, in print, and on their loyalty app. Coffee can be confusing, and there is nothing worse or more embarrassing than getting to the front of a Starbucks line and not knowing what to order or how to order it. So clarity is a central focus for Starbucks. They wanted to take that confusion out of the experience. Here, matcha, 3 ways. The way it's written is the way you'd order it. Their voice is also expressive, stating something simple that rings true, like that first sip feeling. On the other end of the spectrum, this is an example from Chase Bank. They tried to jump on the Monday morning motivation hashtag by shaming their customers on their spending habits. No one likes to be spoken down to, and customers and the general Twitter sphere, they weren't pleased with this tweet. There was a lot of responses like this. People felt that Chase Bank was tone deaf and hypocritical of the way they spend their own money, of their paying habits. But to their credit, though it went poorly, they acknowledged it and apologized. So as a brand, you're probably going to make mistakes and they're going to make you feel sick to your stomach, but don't be afraid to own up to them, apologize, learn, and then move forward. So my guess is since then, Chase Bank hasn't jumped on that Monday motivation hashtag. Another tip, you want to be appropriate. So Snapchat found out the hard way that they crossed the appropriate line. They lost 800 million off their share price after running this ad that makes light of domestic violence. The rule of thumb is if you don't know if something's appropriate, it probably isn't. But on the other hand, don't be shy to share some of your values. Customers want to do business with people who share their values, and they want to do business with people, not brands, not companies. So let your values shine through, but probably stay out of politics. Be authentic. So brands that are authentic resonate with customers. This is pretty much the #1 trait that people want in a brand. They want to feel like they really know you. People don't want to communicate with a super curated, incredibly polished brands all the time. So being honest with people earns their trust. I think of an old Buckley's ad that says, tastes awful, but it works. So that's a really not so appealing truth backed by their promise. In all of your messaging, your brand voice needs to be true to your why, your vision, your customers, your employees, and your values. Someone who's recently been thrown in the spotlight for having an identifiable brand voice is No Name. So you probably recognize this if you're Canadian, a very Canadian brand, discount brand. But they embraced a deep level of customer interaction by making Zoom backgrounds for people who tweeted in. That was easy. All they had to do was write like Nykea's Zoom background on a yellow background, but people ate it up. And they're tweeting things like, with baking soda, maybe I don't have a picture of that one, but with baking soda will not replace oven, which is hilarious. Their voice is deadpan, it's tongue-in-cheek, and it's edgy. So all of those qualities fall pretty extreme on the personality spectrum, which does mean that they had the potential to alienate customers rather than engage them. But that's not what happened. Their Twitter feed exploded and they regularly get hundreds of retweets and thousands of likes. That's hard for most of us to do, much less a discount brand with pretty lackluster branding. Though it seems simple, they have a couple clear rules that they have to follow, which also makes it easy to hand their social media to a social media manager. They say we can never lie. On all tweets follow a simple format. They're all lowercase and less than 6 words. So simple, but really strict rules to stay within. A lot of those creative restraints. Next, we want to meet expectations. We want to give people what they're looking for. If they come to you for something, let's provide it straight up. Especially on your digital experience, you want to make sure if most people come to you to make a reservation, that should be one of the first calls to actions on your website. We recently did Pineview Farms' new website, and if you don't know this company, they're definitely worth knowing. They're a local Saskatoon family business that raises their own meat, and they are so passionate about quality. Their values are the founders' values, and that bleeds through all the copy and all the visuals. Pineview promises quality meat. They show us the meat, and they let people select ideal cuts. Then it arrives on time with what it says on the website. So expectations met. Next, we want to speak to your customers, yours specifically. Your customers want to feel heard. They want to be part of your community. So you don't speak to your grandfather the same way you speak to your friends or your colleagues, the same way you speak to your siblings. You want to curate your brand voice to speak to your ideal customer. Your brand voice will help build the belief that your audience belongs with your brand. Lululemon, they really understand their audience. That's people who are active and striving for a healthier way of life. They do throw a little bit of jargon in because their audience knows what a PR is, a personal record, and they celebrate milestones of physical achievement. So even their bags are covered in messaging that speaks directly to their consumers, focusing on the values that they share. Friends are more important than money, do one thing a day that scares you, breathe deeply, all of that. On the other end of the spectrum, Behiel found themselves in a little bit of trouble when they ran this ad, and they ran it on International Women's Day nonetheless. But in case you can't see it clearly, this ad features 4 white women cheering really excitedly for an appliance, a real 1950s vibe with none of the nostalgia that people are looking for. I don't know about you, but I've never been excited to do laundry. Usually I have to run the washer 2 times after I've left it in there to get mildewy for a few days. So this kind of messaging does not speak to me. Finally, we're going to go into how to determine your brand's voice. As you're going through these steps, I think it's best to have your key stakeholders in the room, people who know the brand and have the ability to make the final call. You can do some of this work without them, but you just might be redoing it when they're in the room. First, know your audience. You need to know who you're talking to. Who are you trying to reach? Are you trying to reach working moms or retired men, millennials, Gen Z do-gooders? Whoever you're trying to reach will set the standard for your voice and your tone. So what personas are you targeting? We'll talk a little bit more about personas in a minute, but let's actually start with audience, which is way broader than a persona. So we're starting at the top of the funnel. Whose opinion do you care most about? When you answer that, you might realize that your brand matters not just to your customers, but maybe to the public or reporters or employees or even policymakers. Could be way different than you anticipated. You can use broad categories like athletes or segments within those categories, like runners would be a segment within athletes. It's up to you, but I'd say be as specific as you can. If your shoes are made for runners specifically, say runners, not athletes. Runners have a different language than basketball players or tennis players or hockey players. And the more that you can speak that language effectively, the more likely you are to actually solve the problem for your customers, solve their problems, and you are to understand their challenges. This is an exercise we do in a brand sprint at Rock and Bloom. We say, let's identify your top 3 audiences. As an example, WestJet is for business travelers, and even more specifically, so going into a segment within that audience, it's for young professionals. There are a lot of people who travel for business, but they're specifically targeting the young professionals. Their next audience is vacation goers. Again, there's a bunch of different kind of vacation goers, but they're talking more specifically to the segment of families and couples. That doesn't mean that your language pushes anyone else out, but you want to speak directly to people. So you're targeting these people more than you are single people going on vacation. And thirdly, their last audience is their employees. These 3 audiences are who all their marketing messaging speaks to. Try thinking about that the next time you see a WestJet ad or the next time you're interacting on their app. Who are they talking to? Are they talking to me? Why personas? So once you've decided those broad audiences, create personas. I'm a huge advocate of personas because they help you stay focused on your customers' problems rather than the services you offer or the solutions you offer. There's an old adage in advertising that says you want to convince 10% of the people 100% of the way rather than 100% of the people 10% of the way. Because if you're talking to everyone, you're really speaking to no one. So you want to focus your marketing efforts and spend and speak the language of your customers. The more you know that, the more effective you're going to be. Identify the needs of your customers and then stay centered on those needs. Building personas helps you make marketing and even beyond that, like strategy and business decisions more effectively. Whenever you have a decision to make, then you can run it through your persona qualifier. So would our personas like this? Would X persona be at this trade show? If so, we might want to go. if that makes sense. And personas aren't just a target demographic. That information is really useful, but when we're building personas, we need to go way deeper. So beyond their background and their demographic info, all the way through to their goals, their challenge, what does a day look like in their life? What are they looking for before they find you? Because when they find you, they're trying to solve a problem. So what are they searching for before that? Can you meet them where they need? And it's awesome if you have the opportunity to build these using a combination of customer data that you might get through your Google Analytics or your social media background, then use that along with market research. Maybe a customer survey is ideal. And then you definitely just want to use your imagination. Use what's your vision? What customers do you want? And that's when personas are the most valuable, when they're a combination of all of those things. Here's an example of a persona. We built this for a client of ours recently. This is Ellie, the educator, and there's a lot of information about her in here, including her routines and online behaviors. You can see how that would be useful. If Instagram's her primary Facebook or her primary social channel, we want to advertise to Ellie on Instagram. Her personality, we want to know a little bit about her. What's her personality like? Maybe where does she rank on certain personality tests? Brand affinities, what brands does she already like? How do they speak? What can we take that's in common from all of those? We want to know her goals, her challenges. I always like to include quotes. This, if you did do a customer survey, pull quotes exactly from there. Otherwise, use your imagination and make them up from there. And then pair it with a marketing message that would work with Ellie. That ties it all back to the brand. Sorry, I haven't talked this much on my own for a long time. So even if you're selling the same product as another company, which all of these are similar products or at least in the same industry, you'll probably have completely different personas or a different audience or at least a different understanding of that audience. So Axe and Dove, they're both selling soap, but they're not target. They would have no overlap in their personas. Virgin versus Air Canada, I bet you they would have very different personas as well. Microsoft versus Apple, Ritz-Carlton versus Airbnb, Chanel versus H&M. So you can kind of picture the audience and then go a little bit deeper and picture what one person in that audience might look like. Secondly, you need to know your why and your what and your how, but the why is the harder part of that. Why brands are stronger. Brands that know why they're in business and that answer isn't to make money, that resonates better with customers, always. And we're coming up with a great why that sounds easy and like you should know it, but it's not. It's surprisingly hard, but it's so important. This is one of the most worthwhile pieces of work I can recommend to you from here. The goal is to do business with people who believe what you believe. So if you know your why, you're going to be more accurately seeking out an audience that why will resonate with them. This is Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. Most companies know their what and their how, but few can articulate their why, or few can do it well. When you're determining this for your brand, have all the key stakeholders in the room. This is where it's probably the most important. It's okay to get emotional, and your why should be visionary and not easily achievable. Something that's really hard to measure. Again, here's an example. I'm using WestJet again. We all know their what, global air travel from Canadian destinations. That's easy. Their how seems pretty obvious as well, by providing safe, friendly, and affordable air travel, and have some fun while we're at it. So there you can hear WestJet's voice, which is pretty light, coming through even in their definition. Their why is a bit more abstract, to enrich the lives of everyone in WestJet's world. So your why should be the most important thing to you and possibly the most difficult thing to measure. It might even be something you can't measure. Like, how does WestJet know if they've enriched the lives of everyone in their world? It's probably a series of a million data points, but they might not ever be able to answer that question. It's more visionary. Third, know the problem that you solve. This is really tightly related to your why, and it's likely one of the reasons you started your company or that your company was started. If you're a little further removed from that, say you've been in business a lot of years, think of what you're trying to get your customers to do, and that can always bring you closer. Uber, they solve a bunch of problems for the rider. Accountability, customer service, ease of pay, supply, transparency, things like that. And they help people, so they help people find rides, know the fare that they'll pay, and see the reputation of the driver all in a matter of seconds. It seems pretty second nature now, but when Uber came to the market, it was hard for them to build trust. Are you really just going to get into a car with a complete stranger? Same with Airbnb. I'm going to go stay at someone's house who I've never met. So they had to build that through their brand. And these are the core tenets of their brand voice. They're considerate, simple and direct, and consistent. Those are the core tenets. And then backing that, they're also optimistic, inviting, bold. All of these qualities are meant to solve the problems of their users in the simplest way, while building the trust for people to actually use their service. And this is some of their marketing before and after revision with brand voice in mind. So a few simple changes made them way more audience first and bolder at an important touch point for them, which is rider sign up. So are you actually going to engage with Uber? Once they get you in the first ride, the second, the third, the fourth are way easier after that, but this is pretty essential. So before the revision, the headline says, "You're going places, we'll get you there." So it's good, but it's not really as clean. When you look at their after, it simply says, "Where to, Jessica?" It's personalized, it saves time, it's more concise, simple, and direct. So you can see how their brand voice bleeds into that, especially the revision. Next, look at your current collateral. You probably have a lot of current collateral already. So think of the voice you've already got. It might be fractured if you have a bunch of people creating content, but it's pull in all of those adjectives. Analyze all of your assets. Look at your website, your social media, your ads, any login portals you might have, business cards, how people answer the phone, all of it. What voice is currently being portrayed? If this wasn't intentionally set, and even sometimes when it is, it can be the voice of the founder, especially if the company is small. People often hire in their likeness. So if it's a company of 5, you might all have the same voice. You might just all happen to have the same voice, which is why as a company gets bigger, it can tend to get more fractured. This is another client of ours, Palliser Hail Insurance. They recently launched a direct-to-consumer hail insurance model. Before that, they were always through a broker. And looking at all their different assets, we can see that their brand voice bleeds through it all, which is educational but casual, professional but light. So we can see that this is their social media, Facebook, Twitter, on billboards, their website, a login portal, on their mobile. Fifth, we want to analyze the competition. So like I said before, you want to stand out. You don't want to have the same voice as all of your competitors. The last thing you want to do actually is be like everyone else in your field. So you want to be memorable. Consider your competition maybe on these personality sliders. Where do they fit in? If we're looking at elite versus mass appeal, obviously we know Chanel is elite, H&M mass appeal. Chanel is not talking to me. I don't have the money to shop there. They're talking to a really small percent of the population. H&M though, they're talking to everyone who wants to be trendy and do it for a dime. On the serious versus playful scale, so you can see Time versus Dorito. Time is a brand that takes themselves very seriously, whereas Doritos will even ask customers to make ads and play them. So they're really playful. Conventional versus rebel. Campbell's, you're probably going to see a pretty nuclear family sitting around a table enjoying a traditional meal through their advertising. Whereas if you go through Red Bull, they're going to say things that aren't true. Like Red Bull gives you wings. They're going to show people flying. It's even animated to show that this is against the grain. Friend versus authority. So friend, Dove is your friend, and CNN is definitely more of an authority figure. And then mature versus mature and classic versus young and innovative. So if we look at Coke and Pepsi, they have really similar products, but very different brand voice. And it doesn't mean, mature and classic doesn't mean you're an old company, and young and innovative doesn't mean you're a new company. It's just to do with your voice. How likely are you to change and be adaptive? So wherever you are on the scales, just be different than your competition and make sure your voice is well defined. We also advise trying to be extreme on at least one of these, just because it's easier to come across and actually have a personality, rather than if you're in the middle, smack dab in the middle of all these, you're going to come across as pretty plain Jane. 6, think of how you want your customers to feel. When people interact with your brand, how should they feel? What emotions do you want to surface? This is a helpful big picture question to identify the brand experience that you're trying to deliver. Your brand voice will help cultivate that. That'll be a huge piece of it. Think of what your product or service does for people. How does it solve their problems? Back to some of those other questions. And how does it enhance their lives? Your voice should reflect and reinforce that. Like if you're a security company, you want to be perceived as a trusted protector. So you want your voice to come across as confident and reassuring. You might not want to be too playful or funny in that way. This is Aristotle's rhetorical triangle, and it was created over 2,000 years ago, but it's still applicable. The most inspiring ads and marketing messaging still use some combination of these appeals, ideally all 3. Ethos at the top is an appeal to the speaker's credibility. So this, you might show logos of people you work with or build your credibility somehow. Logos is an appeal to the audience's logic using facts and evidence. This is when you're going to have data to support what you say. X% of customers have seen growth with our product. And then pathos is what we're talking about here. It's an appeal to the audience's feelings. We want to focus on that. We want to make our audience feel something. That's one that I think you should probably always be pulling. This is World Wildlife Federation and US Food and Drugs. They want to make us feel fear with these ads. Fear is a compelling marketing tool for many brands. It can drive research and action, which is what they're trying to do here. Stop climate change before it changes you. Yikes, that's a little scary. Obviously, the pictures of what might happen if you smoke are alarming. So that's going to raise some emotions in us. On the other side, these brands are pushing on hope and inspiration. They want us to feel like we can achieve. I think of a brand like Nike is especially good at giving us that feeling that challenges are hard, but not surmountable. We can do it. That's even their slogan, just do it. And that other one is from an adoption agency in the States that says, you'll get more than you could ever give. Next, think about brands that you love. What about them speaks to you? Is it applicable to your own brand voice? Is it something you can pull in? What can you learn from them? And how can you elicit a similar emotion? And does it make sense? Do you want to elicit the same emotion? Do you want to elicit fear? If not, you're probably going to have a really different brand voice than some of those brands that we just saw. People like Headspace. This is a scene from their website. They're calm, self-assured, and educational. They're never judgy, never arrogant. And until recently, meditating is something that felt pretty elite, and it felt like it was off limits to many people for a long time. But Headspace made people feel like they could take part. Like meditating isn't just for those elite beings who might have found enlightenment. Meditating is for everyone, and Headspace made it feel accessible. They didn't make you feel stupid if you'd never done it before. Next, think of the adjectives that describe your brand. This is parallel with brand values. This is where brand values come in. you need your values to come across in your brand voice. And you don't want to have an infinite set of values, because there are a lot of things that you would use to define your brand. I'm sure you could think of 20 or 30 descriptors or values, but you want a few that are central to you and that set you apart from every other company. So you might think, oh, we want to have respect. Great, but is that something everyone's going to say? Think of, if you have so many, anything you do can be considered on brand. So you want to have just a couple that can help clarify your messaging. It's really hard work to get people on the same page and to pick just a few of these, but well worth it. What adjectives would you use to describe your brand? This is a helpful way to encapsulate brand attributes. So hone in on the personality portion. It's a good question to ask a larger group. Maybe you want to have everyone give them 5 minutes and write a list that they think goes with your brand, and then go through everyone's list together and see if there's some similar descriptors or themes that come up. Pile them into us, not applicable, and go through. We suggest picking probably 3 to 5 adjectives. For example, a toy brand might describe themselves as playful, silly, adventurous. Maybe they're also lighthearted and a leader as well, but these are the 3 that are going to differentiate them. An example of a brand that has their values come through in their messaging and they have global messaging is Netflix. A culture of creative freedom and responsibility that lies at the core of their ethos. And policing the brand isn't really viable. They have stuff in all languages across the world, but it also would go against the central tenet of creative freedom. They don't want to be policing people in their South America office. Their new brand had to work if you knew Netflix and you already loved it, or if you'd never heard of it before. In new markets, it needed to pave the way and get people excited, pique curiosity. And in existing markets, it had the added challenge of reinforcing their current value and getting us to still be interested, because now there's a bunch of streaming platforms. Why are we still going to subscribe to Netflix? Their new mission statement is see what's next. So that encapsulates the value of discovery. And the stacking, like where you see the black, red, white, is something you're going to see in all of their imagery now. It's a visual to show what's coming next, show discovery. And lastly, we're almost at the end, then you can, then you'll be free of me. You have to actually write it. This is a format I've taken to using lately. There's no right way to do this. I just say get descriptive. This is the brand voice for a local client. Their voice is quirky, emotional, and uplifting. So along with those core descriptors, I like to include a description and then do's and don'ts. So for example, an uplifting brand, it does use a lot of positive and friendly language, and the brand doesn't condescend. So if I was going to describe that, we want to create a sense of a bigger movement and a sense of community. We always want to be optimistic, never negative. Emotional. If you're going to be emotional, you're going to tell first person stories. We don't want to use staid and journalistic language. So having just these definitions will help someone else have control of your brand voice, even if they're creating other content. Another way to write it might be using creative restraints. So 2 descriptors that hold meaning more in their in-between. So something, yet something. So this is another local client whose voice is professional, yet casual, compassionate, yet educational, clear, yet emotional. So again, it's a good idea to write what that means and include some examples for your brand specifically. Think of your customers on one side of the gap and your product on the other. The only way for them to get to you is a bridge. That bridge is your brand or your copy, all of it. Be the brand that your customers need. Know what they want, speak their language, meet them where they are, and most importantly, listen and be ready to iterate and provide for them what they really do need. And that's it. Thanks so much for joining. Now I'll see if there are some questions here. And there is. I probably missed it long ago. What is the most common mistake you see brands making with their language tone? That's a good question. I'd say really just not defining it, having it be fractured, because in this day and age, there's lots of times someone who's going to respond on social media, someone who's in charge of the website, someone who's in charge of doing the design collateral, and so everyone's putting their own voice into it. But if it's not been clearly defined, your brand voice, you're going to see fracture along all of those, and you're going to see something sort of different coming through in each of those. Another one, not knowing your why is huge. So if you're doing, you want to know why you're actually getting up in the morning and why people are coming to work, and you want to make sure that that comes through in your copy and your visuals. Thanks for the question, Marley. Anyone else have any questions? Excellent, getting a few things coming through. Awesome. Well, Carly, that's all I've got. Oh. Awesome. Thanks for the comments, people. And definitely you can always contact me on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or whatever. And if you have more questions, I'll also, I know Wesk is sending this recording, but if you want the slides, I'll post them, or you can probably get them from Wesk as well. Oh, a couple questions coming in yet. For small organizations, what are your thoughts on the owner being the voice? That's a great question, and it's really common, and there's nothing wrong with that if your owner is actually has the customers in mind. If your owner started the business and they have a drive and a passion, a lot of times their voice will become the voice of the actual organization. Still define it, because the idea would be to have that be scalable as you grow. But that's a really good question, Veronique. Awesome, thanks. Someone said good use of the rhetorical triangle. Thank you. That's great. Make sure I don't miss anyone here. Okay. Good, well, I even ended a few minutes early, which is pretty rare for me. Awesome. Sorry, I'm reading and responding at the same time, but thanks so much for joining me. I think that Carly said there was almost 7 of you, and I really appreciate you spending a rainy Wednesday lunch with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for presenting for us today. Yeah, as a reminder, you will be able to view this webinar on demand on our website by the end of the day, and you also will receive an emailed copy for everyone who attended today as well. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Carly. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.